Is Linux a serious gaming platform in 2024? Short answer, yes. Just use Steam, Proton, and any tips I leave in other videos in this channel. Like the video and subscribe. And if you're here for the longer answer, here we go. And also for note, all the gameplay done here on the screen, it's done entirely in Linux. So, Linux for a long time was a very difficult platform to get games working. Developers didn't give flying hoots about catering to it, with it being such a niche audience. However, this has changed over time as more users start using it and open source catching up with proprietary standards. So, one key software for gaming on Linux was Wine, and it made it possible to run video games on Linux. An interesting thing is that Wine is not an emulator, okay, or virtualization, and they did it to avoid copyright concerns, because you see examples of this where you got corporate bullying from Nintendo trying to go after the folks who came up with the Nintendo Switch emulator, despite it making sure that you had to bring your own keys, which just meant that you had to purchase your own Switch in order to actually use the emulator. But even still, they still bullied the folks who made that emulator. So Wine, that's specifically why they made it a compatibility layer instead of an emulator or virtualization, to avoid those kind of concerns. So what's the difference between a compatibility layer and an emulator or virtualization? It just glues together code from Windows system calls to work with Unix or Linux system calls, or the nerd translation, and makes Windows games work on your Linux or Mac. But the main issue with Wine is that the Wine experience, okay, it's for a long time it was either buggy, miserable to debug, or required some bizarre configurations that are beyond the realm of a normal person who simply just wants to load up a game and not worry about messing with a bunch of settings. And we could say that would be it for open source, but here's the thing. Since it was released in 2008, Microsoft abandoned OpenGL standard for DirectX. This made gaming more proprietary, and the free and open source response to this was DXVK, that implemented the DirectX spec with the open standard of Vulkan. And just a nerd translation of that, it just means it's just the way graphics are implemented on your machine. And Microsoft is the one that controls how to do it by using DirectX, compared to OpenGL or Vulkan, which is an open standard that where a community controls it. And Microsoft just over time just kept putting more proprietary standards that created a cat and mouse fight between Microsoft and open source. It led to other companies joining Microsoft, building specifically for Windows, like Epic Games, who created easy anti-cheat that required kernel level access. This means it can access anything on your system. And more standards kept joining Windows that kept this game of cat and mouse, making it so that open source never truly caught up to the proprietary standards that just work on Windows. Because on Windows for a long time, even today, you like on day one, you can just load up a game and not think about it. However, on Linux, no. There's just when Wine was around, it took a while for people to figure out how to get the thing actually working properly. Which is why for a long time, people who used Linux, they used to have a Windows virtual machine to play the video games inside of there. But this changed eventually. Steam, they saw a major commercial opportunity to compete with Nintendo in handheld devices with their Steam Deck machines. Now, they could just fork FreeBSD or OpenBSD, whatever it's called, like every other console developer makes, like Sony, Nintendo, basically anyone that isn't Microsoft, so also Netflix. So they could just create a fork of that operating system. But Steam, they choose to use Linux, okay, to take advantage of the massive contributions from the open source community In addition to that, Steam, they have an advantage over Nintendo, which is distribution with their Steam store, which is an advantage that could actually allow them to challenge Nintendo's monopoly. However, the main problem is that most Steam games are designed to only work on Windows, so they had to get these Windows games working on their devices to leverage the massive advantages that the Linux community has, instead of needing a higher massive team to get the hardware working or doing some kind of brand deal with Microsoft to use their operating system. Okay, and even with OpenBSD or FreeBSD, they would still have to do the same exact thing. So just from a business perspective, it made sense to hire, like, to be able to create your own tool. Okay, and this also, by making video games also work on Linux, they're also able to knock out two birds with one stone, because Gabe is also a Linux user himself, which means that he can enjoy his favorite games without needing a virtual machine or emulator for Windows. So what was their answer for this tool to get these Linux games working? Their answer is Proton. So Proton is essentially glue code from other open source libraries, and with Valve, they're adding their own adjustments to improve the performance and stability of these open source libraries. Okay, and the major game changer with this tool is that this made it so that Linux gamers, they didn't have to use an emulator anymore. No virtual machine. You can just run it just like you would a normal device. In addition to that, you don't have to mess with a bunch of settings anymore in order to get a game running, or deal with dreaded easy anti-cheat made by Epic Games. And this software, it also helped developers because it made it so that they no longer needed to target Linux specifically. It can make it so they can just target Windows, because if it'll work in Windows, Steam does the work for them to make sure that the features that are in Windows are able to be compatible with users across other devices, especially as well, which solves the issue with, okay, so I got this game, but it's only able to support Windows, but I want to expand the audience, but I don't have the money to justify the investment. So that's just a major game changer it has, just with increasing the accessibility of video games across different operating systems beyond Windows. In addition to that, it makes it so that they can build mostly, and the best part of Proton is the installation compared to like Wine is super easy. It's included with Steam if you want it, and no command line fiddling. You can just install the app and like a library and whatnot, and it just makes it so that these games can be played on Linux for normal users who don't like to get dirty in Wine settings or the command line, which is the major game, and then another game changer as well for making it more accessible. Because like, I have no problem messing with the command line, but most people, I perfectly understand that they don't like messing with it. And sometimes you can do things that you don't want to be done through there. So this makes it, what makes Proton though able to catch up, at least compared to other things in the past that ends the game of cat and mouse, is that they actually have the funding and the community support to make it capable to stay on track with Windows. That way, if they introduce some new standard, there is a sufficient amount of funding to have developers to be urgent enough to be able to resolve issues. And just over time, they just kept improving it better and better. And you can do more than just run Windows games with Steam Proton. Okay, you can also run other Windows software and game launchers. I'm not kidding. So the game you see on the screen right now, it is being played on Linux. I had no issues with the Battle.net UI. You can run Windows software with minimal issues, and the only one thing being that is sometimes the UI might look like caveman-like, like ancient, like Windows Vista sometimes. But honestly, the fact that it just works without needing to think about like all these different configurations or needing to go into some forum just to figure out why there's an issue, it just works. And also like the installations and more, all that stuff, it all works. Login, authentication. I also tried it on another launcher for old game that I used to play when I was a little kid, and no issues there. Okay, and because of the open source work, Linux would never been possible for a serious gaming platform. Okay, so there's mostly kudos to the people like Wine and DXVK, and also Steam as well. Like without the open source work, like this, trying to dare to make the impossible possible, this would have never happened today. Although there were minor issues when it came out in the past years, where sometimes the graphics may not work. Like one time when I tried to play Halo, like the game in Halo Combat Evolved remaster version took 23 gigabytes of VRAM, which is kind of insane. I don't know if it's like that anymore, but like you maybe get like some issues like that. But like now, like recently, I just noticed that it reached to a point that just it all works. I was able to play Stalker 2 on day one, which means as a Linux user, I don't have to wait to play for premieres anymore. I can just play on day one, just like most Windows users. Therefore, this makes Linux a serious gaming platform in 2024, which is why I would say it's safe to say that if you want to game on Linux, you can definitely play practically any game you want on Steam, as long as Steam is around to contribute to the open source community. And also, I highly recommend you just try to stay in Steam if possible, but if you load the exe of like other game launchers, it should also work most of the time as well. So yeah, that's at least the kind of amazing thing, that Linux has finally been able to reach a point, in my personal opinion, that I would say is a Linux that it's able to be considered a actual serious gaming platform where you don't have to worry about not being able to run your games, and you can even play things on day one for AAA level video games. So what do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe. And also outside of that, hope, and if you want to hear my opinions about like some other things, just like relating to video gaming or Linux, let me know in the comments below as well. But outside of that, hope you have a good day.